What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the live. I know it's been probably about a week since I did my previous live. Time's just flying by. I can't believe that it is already May 17th. The month of May has just been incredibly fast, but I guess so was April. I don't know if that's just a part of getting older, but I felt like ever since the lockdowns, time has just speeded up incredibly. I feel like 2020 and 2021 felt like an eternity. And then everything from 2022 to now has just been incredibly quick. But guys, let's get into it. So, first off, Trump and Biden have finally agreed to have a debate. I believe one of those debates is going to be June 27th or somewhere around there, with the other debate going to be in September. Why is that such a big deal? Why is it so incredibly important? It's incredibly important because, one, a lot of people didn't even know if there was actually going to be a debate. First of all, Biden especially is very terrible at speaking on the fly. I keep telling people, though, a lot of people assume that because Biden is so terrible at speaking and he has all these guffaws, like when he literally said pause at the teleprompter or when he's trying to find his way around stage. I mean, he's not a very competent guy, but those are random moments. He's not prepared for those. That's just kind of Biden's daily living. If you compare that with Biden's State of the Union, which I continue to tell people was actually quite impressive. I thought Biden's State of the Union was very well done, not focusing on how much was true and how much wasn't. But for our expectations of Biden, his State of the Union, I think went incredibly well. He was well spoken for the majority of it, with maybe a slip up here and there. His points were good. He had comedic jabs at the Republican Party, and he sounded loud and strong. Very rare, but that's what preparation can do. So it would not surprise me if we actually see a State of the Union like Biden for the presidential debates. It'll be interesting to see how Trump and Biden debate. We all kind of remember their debates from 2020. This might be a little bit different. Biden's cognitive decline has obviously accelerated since then. But once again, if he's prepared, Trump may not be able to kind of jab him like Trump normally does. Trump himself, of course, will most likely be both on the offense and the defense. We'll just have to wait and see how Biden plays it out and how the moderators do. It'll be the classic Trump versus Biden and, of course, the moderators, I'm sure. But right now, Trump seems to have a very strong position of strength. But they wanted this debate early because if you remember, most presidential debates are after the summer. So it's kind of odd for it to be this early on in the process. In fact, June is before the Democratic National Committee, before Biden's even essentially chosen as the candidate. So there's a lot of kind of oddity within that. And I've also heard, but haven't verified yet, that there's not going to be an audience. And this is really important because an audience makes a debate. What do I mean by that? If you remember one of the first, or I think it might have been the first or second debate of Trump in 2015, 2016 in the Republican primary, he's roasting the audience and calling the audience donors, and the audience is booing him. And I think this is when there were maybe 16 different candidates up on stage, maybe even more. But that is key because audience stacking exists. Think of audience stacking like a laugh track. Have you ever watched Friends or any 70s, 80s, 90s show, sitcom without the laugh track? It's kind of awkward. You actually don't know what's funny and what's not funny. The laugh track is a psychological trick to essentially go, oh, this is funny, you should be laughing. And it works. Stage stacking, audience stacking is very similar, and that people in the audience will boo, will clap, will cheer to the viewer to essentially say that there is hype, that this is a moment that's exciting, that, hey, this is a point that you should be excited about. That's why often, even when Biden goofed up on the teleprompter, the reason he said pause, the reason he was supposed to pause is because what happened next, the two people beside him and the crowd standed up and were clapping and cheering. So anytime there's a purposeful pause, it's to generate the fact that, hey, what I just said was important. Without any audience in the presidential debate, that's going to not happen. Now, it's interesting to figure out who not having an audience would help or hurt. That's kind of up for debate. I think not having an audience is going to hurt Trump because he feeds off of audience energy, whether the audience is booing him or clapping. He loves that back and forth. So it might actually be kind of awkward for him to not be in that scenario. That's why he loves these Trump rallies so much. And it'll probably help Biden. But who knows? Because at the end of the day, what really matters most is what we're seeing on the television and those clippable, memeable moments. And that is one thing that you need to make sure that you take in consideration is what will the memes be? What will the energy around the debate be? The facts don't matter. The facts of the debate, we all know Biden's going to say, you're lying. Trump's going to say, you're lying. They're going to have different facts. And it's all about encouraging the people who are watching to essentially get heated up. That heat is measured through what I consider memetics, So if you want to consider like memetic warfare and memetic momentum, which I've discussed previously on my channel and in some articles I've written on Substack, memetic momentum specifically will measure how much energy was created by both Biden and Trump's base. And you'll see that in the clips that come out of it and how funny they are. Right? Whether they're negative or positive, of course, there will be feeding from both communities on those clippable moments. And that's really what the debate will serve a purpose for. Another factor is I think it's early because Biden needs to reset the tone. The thing to watch out for is Biden right now, his polling is terrible. What he's probably going to do is sign a bunch of executive orders in the months leading up to the debate, maybe pass some attempt at legislation because he needs to create talking points. For example, he might be signing an executive order on immigration. So now the entire immigration discussion during the debate, Biden can say, hey, look, I signed an executive order. I am strong on immigration, right? Because remember, all that matters is really from about September and October onward for the presidential election. Some states have early voting, early as 3 to 4 weeks, I think, before the actual election. It might not be that far, but it might be in some states. At least it's 2 weeks for certain mail-in voting, which means if you haven't locked down your support by September and October, you might actually already be losing the election. So that's incredibly important. Now, one factor I want to bring up before we get into the article discussion as well is the Bitcoin legislation that is currently going through or has gone through the House and the Senate that Biden might veto. So I posted a tweet on this. And guys, if you're not following me on Twitter, you should be, because that's where I'm probably most active, is on Twitter and here on YouTube. I keep saying Twitter, I should say X. But here's the long and short of it. The SEC created a rule. And anytime a federal administration or federal agency creates a rule, there's a rulemaking process. And rulemaking is incredibly important because it's one of the reasons why the administrative state, specifically the administrative state under the president, has become so powerful is because of rulemaking. Congress can pass a bill, the president can sign it, and they can give sweeping authority to executive agencies. And those executive agencies will then craft rules that they can implement or even undo on later administrations that sometimes go beyond what the original legislation intended. But as long as they can say, well, the legislation that you passed, set up these guideposts and we're still within those guideposts, then the rulemaking can stay. So Congress, to react to that, created what's called the congressional review process, where they believe any rulemaking that is beyond executive authority or that they believe goes beyond the power of the executive and should be passed down to Congress, they can use that congressional review process to revoke a federal agency's rule. So the SEC, which is a federal executive agency, put in a rule, SAB, I think it's 121, it might be something else, essentially stating that any cryptocurrency or Bitcoin held by, say, for example, a third party like an exchange must be listed on their balance sheet. Now, what does that mean? It sounds kind of like, what? Balance sheet, cryptocurrency, exchanges? Well, here's the gist. If I buy Bitcoin on Coinbase and I'm holding my Bitcoin on Coinbase, the order by the SEC makes it sound like that Coinbase has to say, we now own, say I bought $1,000 worth of Bitcoin and hold it under my account as Sam. Coinbase has to report that $1,000 under their assets under management, under their balance sheet, right? Which doesn't make any sense at all because there are tax implications. You're often taxed by what's on your balance sheet. Your balance sheet determines essentially everything having to do with the reporting of your organization, how much money and assets and liabilities you have on file, what is taxed, what is not taxed, what are you reporting, what are profits, what are revenues. Your balance sheet is the key and the crux of all of that stuff. So for exchanges to then have to count my funds as a part of their balance sheet makes no sense at all. But the SEC is still trying to push that rule. And so Congress has said, whoa, 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 that makes no sense. The House passed a vote. And so to make it easy, if they voted yes, it means they're voting to repeal the SEC's rule. If they're voting no, they're voting to not repeal the SEC's rule, which means a yes vote is pro Bitcoin, a no vote is anti Bitcoin. In the House, a majority, if not all of the Republicans voted yes. And only about, I think, 27 Democrats voted yes as well, with the rest of the Democratic Party voting no. So that tells you right there. And the crypto community, because they're not very intelligent, we're all essentially saying, hey, we're so excited that 27 Democrats voted yes, and totally ignoring the fact that most Democrats voted no and almost every Republican voted yes. Their political savviness is pretty terrible. So for that, though, the bill still passed, and we're still happy that those Democrats broke the party line, which is not as big of a deal as some people think, because it's all marketing. People that are new to the political game, I guess, might think it's a big deal, but it's just marketing. So then on the Senate side, it passes the House, it moves to the Senate side. And the Senate, almost every Republican senator votes yes, pro Bitcoin. Let's repeal this SEC rule that we believe needs congressional authority, needs legislation, or that the executive does not have authority to do. Right? Let's repeal this. We're a yes vote. Now, here's what's interesting. About a dozen, literally 12 Democratic senators voted yes as well, with the remaining Democrats, which I think was about 36, voting no. So once again, Republicans were the majority party to be pro-Bitcoin over this Bitcoin legislation. Democrats were just add-ons. But here's what's interesting is I believe it was Cinema, how I need to figure out how Cinema voted. I need to refresh myself, which I can do, I guess, right now, because if you go to my Twitter, I actually have how everybody voted. I should have had this pulled up beforehand, but I'm going to pull it up now just for you guys. So let me tell you how some of them voted. So Democrats, 12 who voted yes, were Cory Booker, Casey Gillibrand. Gillibrand's always been pro crypto. She's out of New York, I believe. Hickenlooper, Kelly out of Arizona. Lujan, Peters, Rosen, Schumer, Cinema, Tester, Wyden. So I was right. Cinema and Tester, which Cinema is technically an independent now, but I'm going to consider a Democrat for the sake of this video. Cinema and Tester, John Tester, and Wyden. Okay, so Cinema isn't going to be here next year, right? She's not going to win her election. So that's a loss for the crypto industry because obviously she's pro Bitcoin. John Tester is running for Senate in Montana. John Tester's a Dem. Montana's a very red state. Tester probably understands that a lot of people in Montana are pro Bitcoin, pro freedom, and that this would really hurt him because of the crypto political action committees or super PACs like Fair Shake would probably start funding money to his opponent. Now, Democrats who said nay, so first of all, Senator Sherrod Brown from Ohio, who I believe sits on the Senate Financial Services Committee or the Senate Banking Committee, one of those two, he voted no, which means he's anti-Bitcoin. He's up for re-election against pro-Bitcoin Bernie Moreno. And so these things matter because we're in such a tight election, although I think Sherrod Brown, regardless of his Bitcoin stance, is going to lose no matter what, because you think 6 years, the Senate elections are 6 years. What has happened in the past 6 years, right? 6 years ago, man, Ohio was incredibly different. Warner and Ossoff both voted no, and Senator Warner's out of Virginia, and Senator John Ossoff is out of Georgia. Both of them are up for re-election in 2026. So if Bitcoiners are tracking how these people are voting, that means the Georgia Senate race in 2026 and the Virginia Senate race in 2026, we should be looking at those now when it comes to funding, because you don't want these people to forget that you are pro-Bitcoin and that you remember their stance on these issues. Stuff like this is really important. And a lot of people kind of take this to the next degree. A lot of people were praising that, hey, we're defeating Elizabeth Warren's anti-crypto army. Yeah, whatever. Like, it needs to be more aggressive than that. We need to understand that, okay, how are we actually going to act based on these votes? So it's very likely that Biden's going to veto this. And I get why, because there probably are some provisions that set precedent that say if Biden does pass this bill, it'll give Congress more sweeping authority to use the Congressional Review Act to get rid of other federal agency rules, which you got to think about 2024. There's no guarantee that the Democrats will take the Senate, will take the House, and there's no guarantee that the Republicans will take the Senate. But if Republicans do take the Senate and the House, they can use the Congressional Review Act to consistently repeal and go after rules from the administration if Biden, say, wins again. So just another interesting thing about our checks and balances here in the United States. Man, I talk a lot. But without further ado, let me stop monologuing and let's go over some of the articles that I want to read today, which I don't know what I want to read today, to be completely honest. There's a lot of articles that I think could be good. Let's see. Biden's reelection strategy. So this is Real Clear Politics. There's a side tab. So House Judiciary Panel holds Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress. What does contempt of Congress actually do? Because I feel like it does nothing. GOP rejects Biden's assertion of executive privilege to keep tapes hidden. No, are you really going to paywall me? No, thank goodness. All right, let's go over some of this, guys. The House Judiciary Committee voted Thursday to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress for refusing to overturn audio recordings of special counsel Robert Hur's interviews with President Biden over his mishandling of classified documents. The Republican-led panel voted 18 to 15 hours after the president sought to shield the attorney general. Mr. Biden asserted executive privilege over the audio tapes that Mr. Hurd used during his two-day interview in October. Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan, Ohio Republican, said the president's last-minute executive privilege assertion underscores the recording's unique perspective and that the panel wants to review them to determine whether Mr. Biden received favorable treatment by the Justice Department. More partisan warfare, which, of course. The measure now moves to a vote before the Republican-led House. If the House passes the resolution, the contempt charge will be referred to the Justice Department. People prosecuted and convicted of a contempt citation face a fine of up to $100,000 in imprisonment for not less than 1 month nor more than 12 months. Mr. Garland, who oversees the department, is likely to ignore it. So isn't that interesting? So Congress can hold someone in contempt, but if Congress, this is what's so fascinating. So if Congress is Republican, or let's say it this way, if Congress is Democratic and the president's Democratic, they can hold someone in contempt and the Department of Justice will mostly move forward with those charges, right? So you see how, so you could have a Republican Congress, a Republican presidency, and a Democratic Senate, and the Republican Congress and the Republican president could actually just still do stuff together within, of course, the rules that they're confined. The Justice Department released redacted transcripts of the Hur interviews earlier this year, but lawmakers say they need the audio tapes to determine whether prosecutors are delivering impartial justice. Yeah, makes sense. Very interesting. I saw another thing that I thought looked cool that I want to read. Nonprofits and their top execs are making billions off of the border crisis. Nonprofits are the ultimate money laundering machine, guys. They really are, unfortunately. You would think, a nonprofit, they're doing good. Well, you wish. Federal funding has turned the business of resettling migrant children into a goldmine for a handful of NGOs and their top-tier executives. While the border crisis has become a major liability for Biden, threatening his re-election chances, it's becoming a huge boon to a group of nonprofits getting rich. Although the federally funded Unaccompanied Children's Program is responsible for resettling unaccompanied migrant minors who enter the U.S., it delegates, which means contracts out, it delegates much of the task to non-governmental organizations, NGOs, that run shelters in the border states of Texas, Arizona, and California. This is how money laundering works within government, is you create a federal agency with a set budget to solve an issue. That set budget is then donated to via contracts, requests for proposal. Some of them have to be public, not all of them. Those requests for proposal are then given to NGOs. And who do you think gets rewarded those lucrative contracts? Most of the time, allies who are then going to funnel the money back to whoever is in charge. It's not necessarily based on merit. And with the recent influx of unaccompanied children, a record 130,000 in 2022, the last year for which there are official stats, the coffers of these NGOs are swelling. The amount of taxpayer money they are getting is obscene, former advisor to Janet Napolitano, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security under Obama, said of the NGOs. We're going to find that the waste, fraud, and abuse of taxpayer money will rival what we saw with the COVID federal money. Interesting that they're attacking Biden's admin over this. Global Refugee, Southwest Key Programs, and Endeavors, Inc. These organizations have seen their combined revenue grow from $597 million in 2019 to an astonishing $2 billion by 2022, the last year for which federal disclosure documents are available. And the CEOs of all three nonprofits reap more than $500,000 each in annual compensation, with one of them, the chief executive of Southwest Key, making more than $1 million. Must be nice. Isn't that crazy? Some of the services, look at this graph, man. Some of the services NGOs provide are eyebrow raising. For example, Endeavors use taxpayer funds to offer migrant children pet therapy, horticulture therapy, and music therapy. In 2020 alone, Endeavors paid Christy Merrill, music therapist, $533,000. An internal Endeavors PowerPoint obtained by American First Legal, an outfit founded by former Trump aide Stephen Miller, showed that the nonprofit conducted 1,656 people plant interactions. Wow. So I get it. This is a shell. Endeavor's 2022 federal disclosure form also shows that it paid $500 million to a company to provide fill-in doctors and nurses, $4.6 million for consulting services. Consulting services is always the one to watch out for. That can mean anything. $1.4 million to attend conferences. $1.4 million to attend conferences. Why do you need to attend conferences? You're just helping children. And $700,000 on lobbyists. There it is, $700,000 on lobbyists. So they get paid by the federal government and then get to use the money they're paid by the federal government to lobby. How crazy is that? In 2021, the NGO shelled out $8 million to hotel management company Esperado Developments to house migrants in their hotels. Endeavors, which gets 99.6% of its revenue from the government, according to federal disclosure forms, declined to comment to the free press. The Administration for Children and Families, blah, 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 over the years from 1.8, so their budget for resettlement for refugees went from 1.8 billion to 6.3 billion. The ORR is expected to spend at least 7.3 billion this year. When asked about the funding increase during a January media event, Krish Omar Vinarha, the chief executive of Global Refugee, said, "We've grown because the need has grown. The nonprofit did not make Vinarha available for an interview." Hope I'm saying that right. Vignaraha or Vignaraja. But while it's true the number of migrants has exploded in recent years, critics say these enormous federal grants far exceeded the current need. Consider Global Refuge, based in Baltimore, Maryland. In 2018, according to its federal disclosure form, the Baltimore-based nonprofit had $50 million in revenue. By 2022, its revenue totaled $270 million to $180 million, of which came from the government. That year, $82 million was spent on housing unaccompanied children. Global Refugee also granted $45 million to an organization that facilitates adoptions as well as resettling migrant children. Now, Global Refugee employs over 550 people nationwide. And CEO Vignarha said in January that the nonprofit plans to expand to at least 700 staffers by the end of 2024. Wow. Isn't that crazy to you guys? I think that's crazy, actually. The fact that here's an important lesson to learn. A very important lesson to learn. Government will often use its funding mechanisms to create economies. What do I mean by that? So think of what we just went over. Think of what we just went over with the migrant crisis. There are now a bunch of NGOs that are being contracted out by the federal government, and the federal government is putting this NGO money in these omnibus spending bills, so you can't really ever say no to it. And it's giving these NGOs huge amounts of money. to fund a problem that the government itself is creating. And then that money goes back into lobbying to then give to the officials for their campaigns. It's exactly like the military industrial complex. The military industrial complex gets a bad rap, and for good reason, but at least the military industrial complex makes sense in the fact that we need national defense and we need a military. The migrant crisis, well, we don't necessarily need some of these NGOs. It's very interesting that the government organization itself doesn't solve these problems. It just doles out the money. And it's also interesting that if we just had stricter enforcement of the law and of the border, then these NGOs wouldn't be needed. So maybe that's, a fiat currency problem. Maybe that's just an unlimited budget deficit problem, right? If we had a constrained budget, right, like an actual constrained budget, would this be happening? Most likely not. But it is happening. And because it is happening, this is how the money's moving. And that's what matters. And so that you guys need to learn that for any industry. Every industry the government funds, the government is essentially creating its own kind of lobbying arm. And so when the government kind of gets its hands in a certain industry through subsidies and handouts and contracts, you then create a lobbying cycle where those people receiving that money obviously want to give back to the people who are giving them that money. And that's what keeps people in power. And that is not unique to America. That is not unique to Western civilization. It's not unique to democracy. It is always like that, almost with any form of government and in any country. So I'm not ragging on anything specifically. That is human nature. Of course, is going to be more prevalent, most likely, in a fiat society where you can print the money. Because in a non-fiat society, you're limited and you have the money or you don't. But that's just the way the world works. The Biden reelection strategy, Trump and the fantasy of the election game changer, big risk, Trump, President Biden's debate gambit, big risk, big reward. So let's talk about this. All right, so last August, I wrote a piece in this publication arguing that President Joe Biden should not debate former President Donald Trump. In the piece I wrote, would the public benefit from a substantive debate on the issue? Of course, but that is not what you get with Trump. A debate with Trump would instantly devolve into a theater of the absurd in which everyone but Trump loses. Not a incorrect point, because Trump's good at debating. Debating not in the intellectual sense, but in the audience sense. The piece ran right after Trump sat out the first Republican primary debate, and I said Donald ditched Republicans and Joe should ditch Donald. I still believe that, but the Biden campaign has come to a different conclusion. After Trump claimed for months that he would debate Biden anytime, anywhere, any place, Biden called Trump's bluff, and after a flurry of press releases and social media posts over a 2-hour period, both campaigns appear to have agreed to plan to ditch the stale, nearly 40-year-old tradition of debates through the Presidential Debate Commission, and have 2 one-on-one debates on terms very friendly to the Biden campaign, including the unprecedented decision to have a debate in June, nearly 5 months before Election Day. If the Biden campaign concluded that they couldn't buck tradition and a debate was necessary, as some outlets have reported, the surprise announcement on Wednesday was a highly strategic move by them. Instead of months of debates about debates, Biden got Trump to agree to all his terms on the spot. Hardly the art of the deal stuff from Trump, but the reality is this is a big gamble for Biden, and it comes with both huge risks and huge rewards. Clearly, after a series of bad polls and the inability to keep the momentum the president gained coming out of the State of the Union address, what did I say at the beginning? He actually, in my opinion, had a good State of the Union. Biden and his team decided they needed to shake up the race. And now, before the conventions, before Trump names a vice presidential nominee, before even most voters are turned into the race, in poker terms, they are going all in just the first few deals of the game, and they'll either be sitting with all the chips or none. The Biden campaign theory of the case is that the more voters see of Trump, the less they'll like him. They want Trump in everyone's living room on a daily basis. They believe the more voters see of Trump, the more it will remind them why they chose to evict him. In addition to putting his unhinged and boorish behavior on full display in front of tens of millions of voters, The debate will also force Trump to answer questions about his role in the last election and the key role he played in Roe v. Wade and his plan to cut taxes for his billionaire buddies. Obviously, this guy's a Biden fan, but that's okay. This is still a good article. The Biden camp also clearly believes it can win the expectations game, which in the modern era presidential debates is half the game. That's right. The expectations are so low for Biden that if he gets even 2 zingers, it's going to be considered a win. But even with all the upside, there's significant risk. CNN, the host of the first debate, does not have a great history of fact-checking or holding Trump accountable. But it's not just CNN. In every live interview Trump has done over the last years, he has acted like a bull in a china shop, bucking every rule, norm, and shred of decency. And while Trump lying with every other word he speaks will be treated as a norm by the media and beyond that, a small Biden misstep will be treated as a massive news and live on throughout the remainder of the campaign. Very true. Trump has so numbed our collective sense of outrage that anything short of punching Biden in the face will be treated as just Trump being Trump, and written off as why his voters love him. Ever since his first campaign, Trump has been graded on a curve, and the debate would be no different. To be fair, grading Trump on a curve is probably true, but it's true because of who Trump is. And so he set his own bar. And there's an art to that. Oh, gosh. Get this guy off my screen. All right, let's look at, Trump and the fantasy of the election game changer, the Biden reelection strategy. Let's look at Biden's reelection strategy. President Joe Biden polls at or below 40% approval. Historically, such unpopularity has made it almost impossible for a president to be reelected. So how does Biden become renominated and reelected? Answer: not by campaigning, not by championing his record, and especially not by doubling down on his neo-socialist and now unpopular agendas. Obviously, this is written by a Republican. Instead, his campaign is focused on 4 other strategies to beat former President Donald Trump. First, left-wing local, state, and federal prosecutors are trying to Trump up or are tying Trump up in court on crimes that have never been seen before, will never be again after the election. That's probably not true. All the cases are politically motivated, with many coordinated with the White House. Even if Trump is not convicted by blue state prosecutors in blue state courtrooms in front of blue state juries, he will lose critical campaigning time. That is correct. Trump may end up paying out $1 billion in legal fees and fines. At 76, the monotonous days in court are designed to destroy him financially, physically, and mentally. Also true. Biden and his operatives know that. In the long term, they may have fatally damaged the American legal system with such judicial sabotage, but short term, they hope to destroy Trump before the ballots are cast. Second, in his 4th year, Biden is suddenly selling government favors to special interest voting blocs or hoping to bring short-term relief to voters at the expense of long-term damage. For elite college students and graduates, there are now billions of dollars in student loan cancellations despite a Supreme Court ruling. For consumers, Biden will likely drain the last drops from the critical strategic petroleum reserve to lower gas prices, now sky high due to his previous disastrous green policies. If that is not enough, Biden has ordered Ukraine not to hit Russian oil facilities to avoid panic in the global oil markets. Biden will quietly jawbone the Federal Reserve Bank to lower interest rates and reinflate the economy. He'll pander to Arab American voters in swing state Michigan by cutting arms deliveries to Israel. See, that's a lose-lose situation. A lot of these, by the way, are lose-lose situations because the people are so embedded in their anti-Trump belief. Their anti-Trump belief is that Biden will have my back completely. And when Biden doesn't have their back completely and only half, Trump starts to look like an interesting alternative. So under the cover of the lockdowns, the left sued in critical states to reduce election day to a mere construct, while 70% of voters mailed in their ballots or voted by early rolling balloting over many weeks. The key was the inability to fully authenticate stuff. 4, Biden, as he did in 2020, will outsource his campaign to the media, 95% of which is left-wing. Talking televised heads will claim Biden is sharp as a knife while focusing on Trump's tweets, Stormy Daniels, Michael Cohen, and lurid but irrelevant testimonies that permeate Trump's court appearances. All right, this article got boring, but I get the idea. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. That will be the strategy. It's probably the most obvious strategy. Let's look at policy. Let's see what we got. Truth about trigger warnings. Biden's 7.5 billion EV charger plan backfires. The green energy wall. Why auto insurance rates are out of control. Pro-life politics after Dobbs. That could be interesting. Shutting out parents. Nonprofits. I already talked about that. Accidental speaker is among the most consequential. What is this? Oh, Mike Johnson. In a matter of 6 months, Mike Johnson has gone from accidental House Speaker to one of the most consequential House Speakers in a generation. That's not hyperbole. Despite presiding over one of the smallest and most restive House majorities in history, he has managed to navigate the warring factions of his party to pass a raft of critical legislation, including a government funding bill that averted a shutdown. The fact that it says catastrophic shutdown always tells me this has probably a Democratic bias. Reauthorization of the foreign surveillance law, critical to disrupting terrorist attacks. Okay, so this person is for invasion on your privacy. A lethal aid package to Ukraine, so they're pro-Ukraine funding, and they're pro-Israel and Taiwan funding. Name me another speaker who has accomplished so much in such a short term against such overwhelming odds. He wasn't even supposed to be in the job. Johnson was chosen only after a 3-week standoff. All right, this article is boring, though. I get it. Johnson's consequential. Not bad for an accidental speaker. That's an interesting point, an accidental speaker. Let's see. Biden, I want to read about this. 7.5 billion EV charge. Geez, get off my screen. You know, I have an ad blocker, but then I can't read the articles if I don't disable the ad blocker, which is a huge pain in the butt. At a Rose Garden event this week, Joe Biden bragged that thanks to my bipartisan infrastructure law, we're building a network of 500,000 charging stations all across America. This is about as believable as the story of his uncle's cannibalistic demise. The truth is that Biden's 5-year, $7.5 billion effort to jumpstart the development of electric vehicle charging stations is doing the opposite. The money has so far produced only 8 new charging stations in 2 years. The overall growth rate in EV charging stations has slowed since he signed that bill. And earlier this month, Tesla gutted its EV charger efforts, dealing the entire scheme a huge blow. In other words, this is shaping up to be a massive waste of taxpayer money. The slow rollout of the Biden-approved EV stations is in part due to cumbersome rules and regulations required to access the money. But there's actually a broader negative impact. It's the slowing of the growth of the EV stations overall. In the 2 years before Biden signed the bill, the number of EV charging stations grew by roughly 20,000. Just 16,000 stations went online. The result is that the ratio of charging stations to EVs is about half what it was in 2021. The administration says not to worry because the build-out will soon take off. We aren't holding our breath. There's still another problem that EV zealots ignore because it takes far longer to charge an electric car than to fill up a gas tank. There would have to be multiples more charging ports and gas pumps to prevent massive lines from forming at charging stations. Only 22% of all the ports today are fast charging, which despite the name still requires about half an hour to charge an EV to 80%. The vast bulk of available ports are level 2 chargers, which require more than an hour to fill an EV battery. The remainder are level 1, which take more than a day. Wow. Isn't that insane? How are you going to wait an entire day to fill up your gas station, to fill up your car? That's insane to me. Just insane. All right, let's go beyond policy. Let's look at world. And this is always going to be something about war. Time for Europe to step up is now. How do alliances end? Honeyed words cannot conceal Xi's disdain for Russia. Xi takes off the mask. Argentina and Brazil, new allies and illiberal weeds. Looming dangers for the greater Middle East. Sinwar in exchange for Rafah. All right, let's see. Mexico had an election. Geez, how AMLO undermined democracy and brought back one-party rule. As Mexico's June 2nd, oh, come on. As Mexico's June 2nd presidential election draws near, more is at stake than a competition among political parties. For the past 5.5 years, the country's prototypical populist leader, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, known as AMLO, has driven a process of democratic backsliding that mirrors developments in countries across the globe. Funny enough, a lot of people loved AMLO when he was first elected, loved AMLO. We're telling everybody how amazing he was. A lot of these articles, maybe even foreign affairs, I bet you. Mexico's democracy, like many others, is being destroyed by a freely elected and popular president who has manipulated democratic institutions and seeks to change not just the rules of the electoral game, but also the entire political system so that his party remains in power. His party is mobilizing its supporters to vote for a refurbished autocracy disguised as a democracy. The president's daily press conferences routinely portray his party as concerned for the poor, combating rampacious elites, and defending national sovereignty against internal and external threats, including opposition parties and foreign influence. He divides the population into two camps, the people versus the enemies of the people, is what every politician does. It's funny that they think this is going to be a hit piece. I mean, I guess it sounds like a hit piece to people who aren't familiar that literally every person in the world who runs for office literally divides people into two camps. AMLO's government has taken steps to alleviate poverty, including large cash payments to poor families and an increase in the minimum wage. But on his watch, criminal violence has run rampant, with many of the education and health programs that formed Mexico's social safety net replaced by clientelism. The poor are left to fend for themselves. Meanwhile, the president has consolidated his control of state institutions. That's what 4 years of a guy will do. Pushed forward legislation that violates the Constitution and carried out an assault on the judiciary and the agencies that oversee elections. His party rules with the overt support of the military, which the president has empowered at the expense of democracy. The armed forces now serve as the country's police, build major public works, and control immigration and infrastructure. They have accrued unprecedented economic power and are accountable only to Lopez Obrador himself. Interesting. Obrador has blurred the line between government and party. His administration has used social programs as a form of refurbished clientelism. Obrador chose a successor who has proven her loyalty to his agenda. As a candidate, Sheinbaum has adopted every last one of the president's preferred policies, even those that seem to go against basic tenets of environmental engineering, in which she holds a doctorate. She has embraced petro-nationalism, for example, applauding the disbursement of $80 billion to prop up the state-run oil company Pemex, and supporting subsidies for other inefficient state energy companies whose operations impede the transition to renewable energy. Sheinbaum has also stood behind Obrador's scheme to staff institutions such as the National Human Rights Commission and the Energy Regulation Commission with loyalists who lack technical or professional experience. Sheinbaum began the presidential race with a 30-point lead that seems almost impossible to close. Her close association with Obrador has worked in her favor. The president remains popular even as polls show disapproval with his government's handling of domestic security. Sheinbaum's main rival, Galvez, is charismatic and quick on her feet, and her indigenous background could enhance her appeal among segments of the Mexican electorate. But Galvez also represents parties that much of the public associates with corruption, elitist rule, and the history of bad governments. It was this very establishment that most voters shunned in the 2018 election that propelled Lopez Obrador into office. Moreover, Jorge Alvarez Mayanez, a candidate representing the center-left, could split the opposition vote. Interesting. I'm not going to do that on this video, but I need to look more into Mexico's election before I make any conclusions. Let's do one more article today, guys. Z takes off the mask. Z takes off the mask. The Beijing tyrant has spent 12 years wrecking China's image. I don't think the Chinese care. As long as the Chinese love him, that's what matters. Xi Jinping's recent European tour was an unprecedented spectacle in international affairs. An Asian leader was arriving as representative of a great power to lesser nations of an anxious continent. China's strongman landed in Paris on May 5th amid diplomatic pleasantries. Behind the gift exchange, including fine French cognac, any hopes French President Macron harbored that the visit might reverse the deterioration in relationships in the broader EU were instantly dashed. Z cut the figure of an aggressive tough guy. In Paris, he took on the subject of Europe's most devastating war since 1945, saying, "We oppose using the Ukraine crisis to cast blame, smear a third country, and incite a new Cold War." He made it clear that Beijing's robust support for Moscow in the third year of Russia's renewed aggression against Ukraine isn't something he is willing to compromise or negotiate. Xi concluded his tour in Hungary, another NATO member, where his reception was far warmer. Upon Xi's arrival in Budapest on May 8th, Xi was given opulent red carpet treatment by Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Under Orban, blah, blah, blah. Let's see. With Hungary, the latter NATO membership notwithstanding, Orban expressed his position concisely. Looking back at the world economy and commerce of 20 years, it doesn't resemble at all what we're living in today. Then we lived in a single polar world, and now we live in a multipolar world order. And one of the main columns of this new world order is China. Gee, I bet Xi loved that. The Chinese party boss, however, reserved his warmest embrace for Serbia. This was a diplomatic love-in, with Serbian President Alexander Vučić offering his Chinese counterpart royal treatment. The capital, Belgrade, was festooned with Chinese flags. Serbian Air Force MiG fighters escorted Xi's plane, and Vučić boasted that his guest, as the leader of a great power, will be met with respect all over the world. The reverence and love he encounters in our Serbia will not be found anywhere else. Because, Serbia and Russia are still culturally close. Warm relations between Beijing and Belgrade are not new, but they have grown cozier in recent years. Chinese investment is a main driver in Serbia's economy. Vučić explained that the sky is the limit when it comes to Chinese-Serbian partnership. For his part, Xi stated, China's position forthrightly. 8 years ago, Serbia became China's first comprehensive strategic partner in the Central and Eastern European region. And today, Serbia is the first European country to build a community of destiny with China. The anti-NATO and especially anti-American tone of Xi's Balkan sojourn was deliberate and impossible to miss. Serbia still nurses grievances against NATO alliance for the 1999 Kosovo War, which included 78 days of NATO bombardment of the Balkan country. Xi's visit designedly coincided with the 25th anniversary of that war's most notorious mistake, the U.S. Air Force's bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, which killed 3 Chinese nationals and injured 20 others. Beijing has never accepted the Pentagon's assertion that this was a terrible mistake, a targeting error. I was involved in the Kosovo War as a senior intel officer, and I saw no evidence that the incident was due to anything other than the fog of war. Don't know why he has to put that in there. Writer's bias. The Chinese people value peace, but will never allow historical tragedies to happen again, Xi told his Serbian host. The friendship is forged in blood between the peoples of China and Serbia and has become the common memory of the two peoples and will inspire both sides to move forward together. In short, he implied that China and Serbia were illegally attacked by NATO and the United States, and Xi wanted to make sure both his friends and his enemies across the Atlantic got the message that it would never happen again. Chinese nationals residing in Belgrade vandalized the already damaged door at the United States Embassy in Belgrade. Oh, that's interesting. I never knew that happened. Since the debacle of Kabul, China has been notably more willing to risk confrontations with the U.S. and its military. Clashes between Chinese fighters and unarmed American and allied surveillance planes have grown more frequent and dangerous. The Chinese confront allied warships, particularly in waters close to China. Beijing under Xi is not just willing but keen to take positions and actions that put it at odds with Washington. It is constantly probing and testing. Increasingly confident that Biden will blink, Washington begged for months to restore the Pentagon's hotline to Chinese military leaders. I'm always fascinated by propaganda photos. Their colors and their images are always just so interesting. Interesting. Let's cut to the chase. Few in Washington's secret corridors of power doubt that an increasingly aggressive China will act in the second half of this decade in ways that run the serious risk of all-out war. Xi has perhaps a decade of rule left in him before age takes its toll. The clock is ticking, and Xi desires to reunite Taiwan with the mainland, is in no doubt. In his dozen years in nearly complete control of China, Xi has exploded all illusions that the most populous nation on earth and its second biggest economy can be regarded as any kind of partner for the future. He has allied himself with the world's pariahs, including Russia, Iran, and North Korea, and some of its lesser nuisances, and has detached itself from rule of law liberal democracies, which it now confronts. Rule of law liberal democracies, right. It has emerged as a threat comparable to or greater than what was posed by the Soviet Union in the Cold War. It is as implacable an enemy of our nation values, and it is increasingly well armed. Yeah, so this is just all China fear mongering. The Soviet Union had nothing but strength on its side. China under Z has strength and subtlety, and inducements to nations everywhere to prefer its patronage over America's. Z is responsible for this. He would like to get all the credit. He should certainly get the blame. All right, so I don't want to end on that note because it was just such a blatantly anti-China article, which I get. But the flip side to that is, what are we doing? Okay, so 40 points later, the Dow Jones is still broken. Book review, John McCabe is superb. The whole story. Let's see. In about face, big Wall Streeters warm to Trump. Okay, this is interesting. They may hate the man. No, don't make me. Oh, come on. I'm not going to be able to read this. This is why I hate the New York Times. They don't let me read their stuff. Not like I don't want to read their stuff, but I wish there were better ways around this. All right, let's look. How to feed AI's hunger for power. That's interesting. Capital One's buy of Discover will help consumers and economy. So that's a paid for article. China undermines our industrial base, threatens national security. Yes, we know that. We've all known that. House SCOTUS decided to not trigger a second Great Depression. None of these look good. Let's talk about AI and then we'll end it. An explosive growth of artificial intelligence will need a lot of electricity from a utility industry that hasn't seen demand grow for 20 years. Tech companies and utilities are at the forefront of a balancing act between technological advancement and environmental sustainability. The urgent push to decarbonize intersects with unprecedented demand for energy, accelerated by the AI and Bitcoin mining sector's surging need for data center power. The resulting scenario presents a complex challenge: how to fulfill the burgeoning energy requirements of the tech industry without derailing efforts towards sustainability. Oh, so this is an interview that I'm not interested in reading. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. I'll go live. I'm trying to go live once a week. I know I was a little late this week. That's okay. You guys will see me next week reading more articles and going live again too. Oh, some comments. Oh, be Catholic or be lost. I don't know how that's relevant, but I'm okay with posting Bible verses. That's okay. 2:45 p.m. You posted it right before I signed off. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. I'll talk to you soon.